So this is how I make a basic loaf of plain white sourdough. First I start with 100 grams of your sourdough starter. Best to use when it's at its peak, which means it's risen and at least doubled. Now I'm going to add 350 grams of filtered water. Just at room temperature is fine. Then I'm going to add some salt. I am using sea salt here, which tends to be a little stronger. So I put in 10 grams, but sometimes not quite that much. Give it a mix. I'm using a dough hook, but a wooden spoon is fine too. Just getting all that starter, water and salt well mixed together. Next I'm going to add my flour, and I am using high grade flour, white flour, and I'm just putting in 520 grams. Using the scales to get a really good measurement. Just a little bit more. Then I'm going to give that a good mix together with my dough hook, making sure all that flour gets incorporated well. So I'm just incorporating all that flour in, making sure there's no loose flour. But I am going to leave it all kind of in a shaggy mess, if you like. Not going to bind it into a ball or anything like that. It might be a little bit sticky. So this is how it should look. And now I'm just wetting a tea towel to pop over the top. And then I'm going to set this on the bench for the day. So after about 1 hour, I'm going to do what I call a round of stretch and folds. So I stretch a side of the dough up and just fold it to the middle. And as I'm doing that, I'm just giving it a slight turn. So you want to do this a few times throughout the day. No set time, just whenever you remember. Stretch it up, fold it over. Then I'm just going to cover it over with a wet tea towel again. So this is a second round of stretch and folds that I'm going to do. It's been a few hours since the last time. So again, stretch it up and fold it to the middle. And turn it as you go. You'll notice the dough becoming a little more elastic, which is what you want. And we'll leave it again for another few hours. Put the wet tea towel over top. So it's been a few hours, and you'll notice that the dough is starting to look a lot shinier and feeling a lot stretchier, and maybe even looking a little puffy, which is all perfect. So I'm just doing another round of stretch and folds here. And then I'm going to pop the wet tea towel over top and leave it. So it's about 9 o'clock at night at this stage, and I'm just going to get my dough. You'll notice that it's risen up beautifully and nice and puffy and shiny. So I'm just going to tip that out onto a nice clean bench. You'll notice there is no flour. And I'm just going to do some stretch and folds. you'll notice that it will be all nice and puffy. So just bringing that together in a big ball, and I'm just going to flip it over, and then I'm going to just cradle it gently, and what I do is I sort of push away from me and pull back towards me while doing a little turn at the same time, and this just makes your dough nice and tight. Then just give it a wee pat, and this is where I'm going to get some flour and just give a good coating on the top. I'm going to get my banneton or basket and line it with a dry floured tea towel. Just going to add a little bit more flour. I'm going to pick up my dough and flip it over and put the nice smooth side down. I'm going to cover that up, and then I will pop that in the fridge for the next 10 to 12 hours. It's now been 10 to 12 hours, and first thing in the morning before you get your dough out, you need to put the oven on 220 on bake and put your cast iron pot in separately from the lid and leave that for the next 45 minutes. So when the 45 minutes is almost up from your cast iron pot being in the oven, we're going to prepare to cook your sourdough. So start off with a piece of baking paper, and I'm just going to get the sourdough out of the fridge. You'll see that it's looking nice and puffy, and I'm going to just flip it onto the baking paper. Then I'm going to get a sharp knife and score the dough. The reason for this is so that it allows the air to come out, which helps make your dough nice and aerated. And you'll notice when you cook it that it will separate in that space that you cut. So it needs to be quite a deep cut. Now I'm just going to get my cast iron pot out of the oven carefully, because it will be very hot. Then I'm just going to lift the dough and drop it gently into the pot. And this is what it will look like with the score inside the pot. Then I'm just going to get some water and sprinkle that on top. Then I'll get my lid carefully, because that will also be hot, and place that on top. Ready to go in the oven. Now I'm just carefully going to put it into the oven, and you'll see that it's sort of on a middle rack. So not too close to the bottom, but enough so you can fit your pot in. And I'm going to set the timer for 35 minutes. And now we wait patiently. When the timer goes off, I'm just going to take the lid off, but then leave it in for maybe another 10 to 15 minutes usually, but I'm going to do this one for 5 minutes because it's all about how brown you like it. So when you're happy with the brownness of your sourdough, it's time to get it out of the oven. There we go, and I'm going to just carefully lift it out so that it can cool down on the bench. Look at that, isn't it beautiful? I do like to eat sourdough warm out of the oven, but it is always easier to cut when it has cooled down. Enjoy!